get her a glass of water, and call her a cab. That's what Judith Ashford said when the woman walked in. Said it to the secretary. Said it without looking at the woman. Said it the way you say things about furniture that's been delivered to the wrong address. Firmly, politely, with the absolute certainty that the mistake will be corrected and everything will return to the way it's supposed to be. The woman stood in the doorway of the conference room at Mercer, Wallace & Polk, the most expensive estate law firm in the city. 17th floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, a table that cost more than most apartments. She wore a gray cardigan over a white blouse, flat shoes, no jewelry except a thin silver chain she kept touching like a rosary. She was maybe 33, dark hair, careful eyes. The eyes of someone who's been in rooms where she doesn't belong and has learned to read the atmosphere before speaking. "I received a letter," the woman said. She held up an envelope, cream-colored, heavy stock, the firm's letterhead embossed in the corner. "It said I should be here today, for the reading of the will." Judith turned in her chair, looked at the woman for the first time. The assessment took 3 seconds. The cardigan, the flat shoes, the absence of anything that indicated this person had any connection to the $1.4 billion estate of Alexander Ashford, who'd been buried 6 days ago with a eulogy from a senator and a guest list that included half the Fortune 500. "There must be a mistake," Judith said. "This is a private family matter. Robert," she turned to the attorney, "handle this." Robert Mercer, senior partner, 67, the kind of lawyer whose patience was billed at $1,200 an hour, sat at the head of the table with a leather portfolio in front of him and an expression that gave away nothing. He'd been doing this for 41 years. He'd read wills that destroyed families, rebuilt families, and occasionally did both in the same sentence. "There's no mistake," Robert said. "Please sit down, Ms. Reyes, Elena Reyes. Ms. Reyes, please sit down." Elena sat, at the far end of the table, as far from Judith as geometry allowed. Judith's son, Garrett, 31, investment analyst, wearing a watch that cost more than Elena's car, leaned toward his mother and whispered loud enough for the room to hear. "Who the hell is she?" "Nobody," Judith whispered back. "Robert's being theatrical." Judith's daughter, Camille, 28, art consultant, the kind of career that existed specifically for women whose families could fund the gap between passion and paycheck, didn't whisper. She stared at Elena with the unblinking curiosity of someone watching a nature documentary about an animal she'd never seen before. Robert opened the portfolio. Inside was a single envelope, sealed. Alexander Ashford's handwriting on the front. To be read in full, in the presence of all named parties. "Before I open this," Robert said, "I need to inform the family that Alexander revised his will 6 months ago. He did so privately, in my office, without the knowledge of any family member." 6 months ago he was in treatment, Judith said. "He was in Switzerland, at the clinic." "He was not in Switzerland for the entirety of that period, Mrs. Ashford." "What does that mean?" "It means he had other business, which will become clear." Robert broke the seal, removed the document. 12 pages. He'd read it 3 times already. Once when Alexander signed it, once when Alexander died, and once this morning in preparation for the next 45 minutes, which he expected to be the most difficult of his career. "I'll read the relevant sections," Robert said. "Alexander requested that I read his words directly, without paraphrase." He cleared his throat. Began. "Quick favor. If you've ever been in a room where everything you thought was true was about to be dismantled by a dead man's words, tap like and subscribe. Because what Alexander Ashford put in this will didn't just redistribute his money, it redistributed his family. I, Alexander James Ashford, being of sound mind and clear conscience, clearer than it's been in 53 years, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, superseding all prior versions. Robert glanced at Judith. Her jaw was set. Her hands were folded on the table. The posture of a woman who'd already decided she knew what was coming and was wrong about all of it. To my wife, Judith Ashford. We were married for 28 years. In that time, you were an exceptional partner in the public construction of a life that looked, from the outside, like everything either of us had ever wanted. Judith's chin lifted, slightly. The almost invisible motion of a woman receiving a compliment she believed she'd earned. On our wedding day, your father, a man I respected and feared in equal measure, presented me with a prenuptial agreement. You signed it, I signed it. The terms were specific. In the event of divorce or death, you would receive the primary residence and the contents of the joint household account. At the time, the residence was worth $2.4 million, and the account held approximately $800,000. The house is worth $11 million now, Garrett muttered. Let him finish, Robert said. I honored the prenuptial agreement for 28 years. I honored it because I am a man of my word, and because the agreement was fair when it was signed, and because you, Judith, never once asked to renegotiate it. You seemed satisfied with the terms. You told me so, repeatedly, usually during arguments about money, when you would say, and I can quote because I heard it approximately 40 times, I don't care about the money, Alexander. I married you for you. Judith's face didn't change, but her hands, folded on the table, tightened. The knuckles went white. I believed you. For a long time. Then I stopped. Not because of anything dramatic. No affair, no betrayal, no moment of revelation. I simply noticed, over the years, that the woman who didn't care about the money cared very deeply about the house, the cars, the club memberships, the vacation properties, the staff, the galas, and every other material expression of the wealth she said she didn't want. I don't say this with anger. I say it with the clarity that comes from 53 years of living and the particular honesty that a terminal diagnosis provides. The room shifted. Garrett's hand went to his watch, a nervous habit. Camille's stare moved from Elena to her mother. Elena sat still at the far end of the table, touching the silver chain. Judith, you will receive what the prenuptial agreement provides. The primary residence at 4100 Briarcliff Lane and the contents of the joint household account, which, as of the date of this document, contains $1.2 million. You will not receive shares in Ashford Industries. You will not receive control of the Ashford Foundation. You will not receive the investment portfolio, the secondary properties, or the art collection. These were specifically excluded from the prenuptial agreement because they were mine before the marriage and remained mine throughout. That's... Judith started. Mrs. Ashford, Robert said quietly. Please allow me to finish. He was sick. He wasn't thinking clearly. Alexander completed a cognitive evaluation 3 days before signing this document. The results are on file. He was of sound mind. This is insane. Please, Robert said. There's more. How much more? considerably more. Tap like if you can feel this room tightening, because Alexander Ashford isn't done. And the woman in the cardigan hasn't been mentioned yet. Robert continued. To my son, Garrett. You are 31 years old. You have an MBA from Wharton and a position at a hedge fund that your mother arranged through a phone call to her college roommate's husband. In 12 years of professional life, you have not built, created, or originated a single thing. You have managed other people's money with competence, but without imagination. And you have spent your own money, which is to say, my money, with imagination, but without competence. Garrett's face went red. Not embarrassment, fury. The particular fury of a man hearing the truth from someone he can't argue with, because that someone is dead. I do not leave you shares in Ashford Industries because you have never expressed interest in what the company does, only in what it earns. I do not leave you the investment portfolio because you would liquidate it within 18 months. I leave you a trust, $5 million, managed by Robert Mercer, dispersed at $250,000 per year for 20 years. This is enough to live well. It is not enough to live recklessly. The difference is the lesson. $250,000 a year? Garrett said. Dad's estate is worth $1.4 billion, and I get $250,000 a year? $5 million in total, Robert corrected. Over 20 years. Garrett's voice cracked. Not from sadness. From the mathematical realization that the life he'd built on assumptions had just been repriced. To my daughter, Camille, Robert continued. You are the most like me of my children. Observant, quiet, more interested in watching than performing. You are also the most dishonest, because your silence is not contemplation. It is avoidance. You have spent 28 years watching your mother control every room she enters, and you have never once challenged her, disagreed with her, or told her that the way she treats people, staff, strangers, anyone she considers beneath her, is cruel. Your silence is complicity, Camille. And complicity is not a neutral position. Camille's eyes filled. Not dramatically, just a slow wetness that she blinked away because Ashfords didn't cry in conference rooms. I leave you the art collection. 67 pieces, appraised collectively at $28 million. I leave it to you because you are the only person in this family who ever looked at any of it. The Rothko in the living room. You used to sit in front of it when you were 9 years old and ask me what it meant. I never gave you a good answer. Here's the answer I should have given. It means whatever you need it to mean. That's what art does. That's what I should have done. Camille wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. The gesture was quick, a reflex, the physical memory of being told that emotion was weakness. Camille, I also leave you a request. Not a condition, a request. I ask that you spend 1 year, just one, doing something that frightens you. Not dangerous, frightening. The difference matters. If at the end of that year you've found your voice, you won't need anything else I could give you. The art will fund the search. Robert paused, took a breath. The next section was the one that would detonate the room. I come now to Elena Reyes. Every head turned. Elena sat at the far end of the table, hands in her lap, the silver chain between her fingers. She didn't look up. 6 months ago, I received a letter. It was from a private investigator I'd hired 33 years ago, a man named Paul Caruso, now retired, who I'd asked to find someone I'd lost. He'd been searching, on and off, for 3 decades. The retainer was $5,000 a year. I never canceled it. I never gave up. Robert looked at Elena. She was looking at the table. The person he found was my daughter. The silence that followed wasn't silence. It was the sound of 3 people, Judith, Garrett, Camille, processing a piece of information that restructured every assumption they'd built their identities on. "That's not possible," Judith said. Her voice was flat, controlled, the voice of a woman holding a crack together with willpower. "Alexander didn't have... He would have told me." "He didn't tell you," Robert said. "He told me, 6 months ago, and he asked me to update the will." "Who is this woman?" Robert looked at the document, continued reading. "Elena Reyes is my biological daughter. Her mother was a woman named Isabel Reyes, whom I loved when I was 20 years old, before I became what the world thinks I am. Isabel worked at my father's factory in Trenton, New Jersey. She was 19. I was 20. We were together for 7 months. When she became pregnant, my father, a man whose ideas about bloodlines and social class belonged in a century I won't dignify by naming, gave me a choice: the family or the girl." Robert's voice was steady. He'd practiced this section 3 times, alone in his office, because the words required precision and the room required a voice that didn't waver. "I chose the family. I have regretted it every day of my life for 33 years. Not performatively. Not in the way men regret things they can undo. In the way you regret the one decision that defines you. The one you carry in your chest like a second heartbeat. The one that wakes you at 3 a.m. and asks if you know what you've done." Elena's hand tightened on the silver chain. Her eyes were wet, but her face was still. "Isabel raised Elena alone, in Trenton, on a factory worker's salary. She didn't ask me for money. She didn't contact me. She didn't tell Elena who her father was. She protected her daughter from the man who'd abandoned them both, and she did it with a grace and a strength that I, with all my money and all my companies and all my influence, have never once possessed." "This is absurd," Garrett said. "Dad had a secret daughter for 33 years, and nobody knew?" "I knew," Robert said. "You knew and you didn't tell us?" "I'm Alexander's attorney. My obligation is to my client, not to his family's comfort." "This is a fraud. She's a fraud," Garrett pointed at Elena. "Some woman shows up with a letter and suddenly she's—" "DNA confirmation is on file," Robert said. "Conducted 4 months ago at Alexander's request. 99.97% probability of paternity. The results were verified by 2 independent laboratories. This is not a claim, Mr. Ashford. This is a fact." Garrett sat back. His mouth opened and closed. The watch on his wrist, the one that cost $40,000, the one his father had bought him for graduation, the one he'd worn every day as evidence of belonging, suddenly felt heavy. If you've ever watched someone's identity crack in real time, stay with me. Because Alexander Ashford's will isn't finished, and what he left Elena is going to make Judith's glass of water and cab feel like the most expensive insult in history. Robert continued. "When Paul Caruso found Elena 6 months ago, I did something I should have done 33 years earlier. I went to see her. He was in Switzerland, Judith repeated. In treatment. The clinic confirmed he was a patient. He was, for the first 2 weeks. After that, he discharged himself and flew to Trenton. He visited Elena every week for the remaining 4.5 months of his life. Every Thursday. Every Thursday, he told me he was at the clinic, Judith said. He called from Switzerland. He called from a phone with a Swiss number that I arranged at his request, Robert said. He wanted privacy. He didn't want the visits to become public until he'd had time to know his daughter. To know her? He knew her for 4 months. He knew about her for 33 years, Mrs. Ashford. He met her for 4 months. There's a difference. Robert returned to the document. In the 4 months I spent with Elena, I learned more about the man I should have been than in 53 years of being the man I was. She is a public school teacher, 4th grade. She earns $44,000 a year. She lives in a 2-bedroom apartment in Trenton with a cat named Walter. Named, she told me, after a teacher she'd had in 3rd grade who told her she was smart enough to be anything. She drives a car that is, by the standards of the people in this room, embarrassing. She wears clothes that are, by the standards of the people in this room, wrong. Elena flinched, almost invisible. The flinch of a woman hearing her life described through a lens she recognized but had never chosen. But Elena Reyes is the most extraordinary person I have ever met. Not because of what she's achieved, though teaching 30 children to read every year is an achievement that dwarfs anything on my resume. Because of who she is. Because she was abandoned by her father, raised by a mother who worked double shifts, and she grew into a woman who is kind. Genuinely, structurally, incorruptibly kind. The kind of kind that doesn't perform. The kind that costs something. Robert paused. Let the words settle. I failed Isabel. I failed Elena. I cannot undo 33 years of absence, but I can do this. He turned the page. To Elena Reyes, my daughter. I leave my controlling interest in Ashford Industries, 61% of shares, valued at approximately $780 million. I leave the Ashford Foundation, including its $140 million endowment and its board seat, which I ask her to fill personally. I leave the secondary properties in Aspen, Martha's Vineyard, and Geneva, to be used, sold, or donated at her discretion. And I leave her my name. I have filed legal documentation recognizing Elena Reyes as Elena Reyes Ashford. She is my daughter. She carries my blood. And she will carry my company because she is the only person in this room who understands that wealth is not what you have. It is what you do with what you have. The room did not explode. Explosions are fast. This was slow. A structural collapse, the kind where the building stands for a moment after the supports are removed, and then, piece by piece, the architecture of 28 years of assumptions came apart. Judith spoke first. I'm contesting this. That is your right, Robert said. He was dying. He was on medication. He was manipulated by this woman who appeared out of nowhere. Alexander anticipated this response. He prepared a video deposition recorded in this office 4 months ago, in which he states his intentions clearly, demonstrates cognitive function, and addresses each potential basis for contestation. The video is 47 minutes long. I can play it now if you'd like. I don't want to watch a video. I want to speak to a judge. You're welcome to retain counsel and file a challenge. I should note, however, that Alexander's will was witnessed by 3 attorneys, notarized and accompanied by the cognitive evaluation I mentioned. In my professional experience, 41 years of estate law, this document is effectively unassailable. $1.2 million, Judith said. Her voice was thin now, the performance cracking. He left me $1.2 million and a house. He left you what the prenuptial agreement specified, the agreement you signed, the agreement you cited 40 times during your marriage when you told him you didn't care about the money. The words, her own words, reflected back at her from a dead man's will, landed with surgical precision. You could see the impact in Judith's face, the recognition that the thing she'd said to win arguments had become the thing that defined her settlement. I didn't mean... The agreement is the agreement, Mrs. Ashford. It says what it says. I gave him 28 years. I hosted his dinners. I attended his events. I raised his children. I smiled in every photograph, shook every hand, wore every dress he wanted me to wear. I built the life that made his money possible. You built a life, Mrs. Ashford. Alexander built the money. The prenuptial agreement reflects that distinction. He can't do this from a grave. That is precisely what a will does, Mrs. Ashford. It speaks from a grave. And Alexander chose his words very carefully. Judith stood. Her chair scraped the floor, the first ungraceful sound she'd made in the room. In 28 years, possibly. She picked up her bag, Hermes, $12,000, a gift from Alexander on their 20th anniversary, the kind of gift that looked like love and functioned like a receipt. I'll see you in court, Robert. I'll be there, Mrs. Ashford. As will the video deposition. As will the cognitive evaluation. As will the DNA report. The 33 years of private investigator records, and every Thursday airline ticket Alexander purchased to fly to Trenton and back. He flew to Trenton every Thursday? Every Thursday, for 4.5 months. Commercial. Coach class. He didn't want to be recognized. Coach class. Judith repeated it the way you repeat words in a language you don't speak. The sounds are familiar, but the meaning is foreign. Alexander Ashford, who had a private jet, had flown coach to Trenton, New Jersey, every week for 4 months to sit in his secret daughter's apartment and drink coffee from a dollar store mug. Coach class. Dollar store mug. A silver chain from a 19-year-old factory worker. The man Judith had been married to for 28 years was a stranger. And the evidence wasn't in the will. It was in the details. The details that revealed a man who'd been living a second life not out of deception, but out of love. A different kind of love than the kind Judith had provided. The kind that didn't require Hermes bags or gala seating charts or the careful maintenance of a public image. The kind that flew coach. Judith walked out. Her heels clicked on the marble floor. The sound got quieter, then gone. Garrett stood up. This is insane. She's a school teacher. She can't run a $1.4 billion company. Your father believed she could. My father was dying of cancer and being manipulated by a woman who, Mr. Ashford. Robert's voice hardened for the first time. Your father was the most deliberate man I have ever known. He didn't make emotional decisions. He made calculated ones. He spent 33 years searching for his daughter. He spent 4 months getting to know her. And he spent his final weeks he could have spent on anything, sitting in this office with me, restructuring his estate so that the company he built from nothing would be led by the person he trusted most. That is not manipulation. That is judgment. Garrett looked at Elena. She hadn't spoken, hadn't reacted, hadn't cried or argued or defended herself. She sat at the far end of the table, with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the wood, and she looked exactly like what she was, a fourth-grade teacher from Trenton who'd been told 6 months ago that her father was a billionaire, and 4 months later that he was dying. And now, 6 days after his funeral, that he'd left her everything. "Did you know?" Garrett asked her. "About the will?" Elena looked up. "No." "He didn't tell you?" "He told me about the foundation. He said he wanted me involved. But the company, the shares, no. He didn't tell me." "What did he tell you?" Elena was quiet for a moment. The room waited. "He told me he was sorry," she said. "Every Thursday, every visit, he'd sit in my apartment, this man in a suit that cost more than my rent, and he'd drink coffee from a mug I got at a dollar store, and he'd tell me about the day he left my mother, and he'd cry." She paused. "The first visit was the hardest. He knocked on my door, I opened it, and he just stood there, this tall man in a beautiful coat, standing in the hallway of a building that smells like other people's cooking and has a radiator that clangs at midnight. He looked at me and he said, 'You have your mother's face.' And then he couldn't speak for 10 minutes. Elena touched the chain. He told me about the choice his father gave him, the family or the girl. He said he chose the family because he was 20 and scared, and his father's voice was the loudest voice in his head. He said he spent 33 years trying to unhear it. The second visit, he brought a photograph. My mother at 19, standing outside the factory, smiling. He'd kept it in his wallet for 33 years, behind his credit cards, behind his driver's license, behind everything anyone would see if they opened his wallet in the ordinary course of a day. He'd hidden my mother's face behind the machinery of his life, and he carried her every day anyway. By the fourth visit, he stopped crying. We just talked about my students, about my apartment, about Walter, the cat, who sat on his lap the second time he came and never moved. He said the cat was a better judge of character than his board of directors. By the 8th visit, he told me he was sick. He said the treatment wasn't working. He said he wanted to spend whatever time he had left being my father. Not a good father. He said he'd forfeited that right. Just a present one. He said, "I can't give you 33 years, but I can give you Thursdays." He gave me 17 Thursdays. That's 4 months. 17 afternoons in my apartment. 17 cups of bad coffee. 17 conversations about things that ranged from the profound to the absurd. He once spent 40 minutes explaining why the designated hitter rule was ruining baseball. And I don't even watch baseball. But I listened because he was my father and he was dying. And I would have listened to him read a phone book. She looked at Judith, at Garrett, at Camille. I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't know he was looking for me. I didn't know he was sick until the second visit. I didn't know about the will until right now. All I knew was that a man showed up at my door and said, "You have your mother's face," and then spent 4 months trying to be a father in the time he had left. "A present one," Judith repeated. "He spent 4 months with you while telling me he was in Switzerland. He lied to his family." "He lied to his wife," Elena corrected quietly. "I was also his family. I was just the family he hid. The sentence sat in the room like a blade. Not angry, not accusatory, just true. The kind of truth that doesn't need volume because the weight of it is enough. Tap like if you've ever been the person someone hid, or the person who did the hiding. Because this story has one more turn. And it involves Judith, a phone call, and the realization that the woman she tried to put in a cab is now the most powerful person in the room. The meeting ended. Robert gathered the documents. Elena signed what needed signing. Judith refused to sign anything and left with Garrett, who was already on the phone with the litigator. Camille stayed. She sat across from Elena in the empty conference room, the table between them, the windows showing a city that didn't know or care what had just happened 17 floors above it. "Did he talk about us?" Camille asked. "Yes." "What did he say?" "He said Garrett was smart but lazy. He said your mother was beautiful but careful. And he said you were the one he worried about most." "Why?" "Because you were the quietest. And quiet people either have nothing to say or everything to say and no one to say it to. He wasn't sure which one you were." "What did he decide?" "He decided it was the second one. That's why he left you the art. He said the Rothko was yours because you were the only person who ever sat in front of it without checking your phone." Camille almost smiled. The almost was the most honest expression Elena had seen from an Ashford all morning. "I don't hate you," Camille said. "I didn't expect you to love me." "My mother's going to fight this. You know that." "I know." "She'll hire the most expensive lawyers in the country. She'll challenge the DNA, the cognitive evaluation, the video deposition. She'll argue undue influence, diminished capacity, everything." "I know." "And you'll still be sitting there in a cardigan and flat shoes, and she'll be in Chanel and pearls. And the judge will look at both of you and decide who looks more like an Ashford." "I'm not trying to look like an Ashford." "That's why you'll win." Camille stood, picked up her bag, designer, of course, but worn at the edges, the way things get worn when you use them instead of displaying them. "My father wasn't a good man," Camille said. "He was a man who did one terrible thing when he was 20 and spent 33 years trying to make it right. That doesn't make him good. It makes him human." "That's more than most people are." Camille looked at Elena for a long moment. Then she extended her hand. Elena shook it. "Welcome to the family," Camille said. "It's worse than it looks." "Most things are." "Not you, though." A pause. "I think Dad was right about you. The kind thing." She left. Elena sat alone in the conference room, 17 floors up. The city below. The documents on the table. The will of a man she'd known for 4 months and missed already. Missed the Thursday visits, the coffee in the dollar store mug, the stories about a factory in Trenton and a girl named Isabel who wore a silver chain and never took it off. Robert came back in, sat across from her. "How are you doing?" "I'm a 4th grade teacher from Trenton. This morning I was grading spelling tests. Now I own 61% of a company worth $1.4 billion. Technically, you don't own it until probate clears, but yes." "Robert, I don't know how to run a company." "Alexander didn't know how to run a company when he started one. He learned. He also hired people who knew more than he did, which is the most important management skill there is. What about Judith? She'll contest. She'll lose. The will is airtight. Alexander made sure of it. I don't want to fight her. You won't have to. The law will fight for you. That's what Alexander paid me for. Elena looked at the silver chain, her mother's chain, given by a 20-year-old boy to a 19-year-old girl in a factory town, and carried for 33 years through double shifts and single parenthood and the quiet endurance of a woman who'd been left but refused to be broken. My mother died 3 years ago, Elena said. She never knew he was looking for her. I know. She would have forgiven him. Instantly. That's the kind of person she was. Alexander knew that too. He said it was one of the reasons he was afraid to find her. Afraid? He said being forgiven by someone you've hurt is harder than being punished. Punishment has an end. Forgiveness is something you have to live with. Elena was quiet. Then she said, What do I do now? You go home. You grade your spelling tests. And on Monday, you come back here, and we start the transition. In my cardigan and flat shoes? In whatever you want. That's the point of owning the company. Elena laughed. A real laugh. Short, surprised, the laugh of a person who'd spent the morning in a room full of people who measured human beings by what they wore, and was being told by a $1,200 an hour attorney that her cardigan was fine. She drove home, to Trenton, to the 2-bedroom apartment. The cat, Walter, was on the kitchen counter. The spelling tests were on the table. The dollar store mug, the one Alexander had drunk from every Thursday, the one he'd held in his hands the way you hold something precious and unfamiliar, the way billionaires hold things that cost nothing and are therefore priceless, sat in the dish rack. She picked it up, held it, set it back. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Miss Reyes, this is Camille Ashford. I realize this is forward, but I'd like to have coffee with you this week. Not as a family obligation. As a person who wants to know her sister. If that's not too much. Elena typed back. It's not too much. Tuesday? Tuesday works. I'll come to Trenton. You don't have to come here. I want to. I want to see where he spent his Thursdays. Elena looked at the apartment, the second-hand couch, the bookshelf full of children's books she brought home from school, the window that faced a parking lot, the kitchen where a billionaire had sat every week for 4 months, drinking from a dollar store mug and learning how to be a father 33 years too late. He sat in the chair by the window, Elena typed. He said the light was good. That sounds like him. He always knew where the light was. Elena set the phone down, fed the cat, sat in the chair by the window, Alexander's chair now, the way the silver chain was Isabel's chain, and the dollar store mug was their mug. Objects that had been ordinary until someone loved them into meaning. The light was good. He'd been right about that. She had 67 spelling tests to grade. A class of 34th graders who would walk into her room on Monday morning not knowing or caring that their teacher now owned 61% of a company worth more than some countries. They would ask her how to spell necessary, and whether they could use the bathroom, and whether it was true that the cafeteria was serving pizza on Wednesday. And she would answer them, the way she always answered them, with patience, with kindness. with the specific, structural, incorruptible kind of care that Alexander Ashford had seen in 4 months, and trusted with everything he'd spent a lifetime building. Judith would fight. Garrett would rage. Lawyers would bill hours that could fund Elena's classroom for a century. But the will was clear. The DNA was confirmed. The video deposition was 47 minutes of a dying man looking into a camera with the particular honesty that terminal diagnosis provides, and saying, "I made one terrible choice at 20. I've spent my whole life paying for it. This will is my last payment." And the woman in the cardigan, the one Judith had tried to put in a cab, was sitting in a chair by a window in Trenton, grading spelling tests, wearing a silver chain her mother never took off, holding a name she'd waited 33 years to carry: Elena Reyes Ashford. It was, finally, enough.